Imagine just for a second that you're a dad. I mean, for some of us, like myself, we don't have to imagine. I mean, I'm a dad. I have 3 kids. 2 of them are little girls. I have a son, and I have two young daughters. And for any of the dads out there, in the comments or otherwise, they can probably attest there is a special bond between a father and their daughter, much like there is between a father and son, but it's different. If you're not a dad, imagine for a second that you are. Just if you even possibly could fathom that. You're the father of a beautiful little girl. And then one day, that little girl, your little girl, doesn't come home. Anyone that has ever been recorded or spoken about being in that situation describes it as one of the most, if not the most terrifying scenario that they could possibly imagine living through as a parent. And for one dad in Southern California, that was his life. This is a story of a guy named Bryce, who I call King of the Nerds, and likely is also King of the Dads. Hey, hi, everyone. Hi, my name is Onepeg. Yes, I'm doing something a little bit different. If you notice, the microphone is out and about. We got it in hand right now. It feels a little bit more natural for me to talk about things like this when I'm able to like move my hand around. I don't know. Maybe it's an old like stage singer thing. I have no idea, but this feels more natural to me. And this video is a little bit different from what I typically generate. I kind of like to do these like little dives into stories, and I want to kind of get into this where it's like once a week or once every other week we dive into a cool story that I think is just interesting to share with everyone. I kind of like doing the storytelling thing, and I'd like to do more of this as long as you guys are cool with it. I think we could do something cool together. And this story I wanted to start with is insane, but in the best way possible. It's a story of a cryptocurrency genius, an IT professional with a long history of ultra detailed and professional work that went out of his way to rescue his own daughter from a Mexican sex trafficking ring. If that isn't interesting to you, I don't know what is. But this one grabbed me, and I have been obsessed with it for like the past week. I've looked into everything in the public domain that I possibly could. And I want to make abundantly clear that this video, everything that I'm telling you, everything that I'm going to share with you is stuff that is out of the word of the mouth of Bryce himself, this guy Bryce, and any other postings, public postings that he's made, and interviews or news stories made about this that are already public. It's just that all of the stuff that I saw that was like news story wise all scratched the surface, and they didn't look into like the deeper stuff, like how did this go down? And that's what I want to share with you. Okay, all right, so this is Bryce Weiner. In certain nerd circles, especially if you've been involved in cryptocurrency ever, trading, whatever, Bryce is kind of a rock star. He's an uber IT genius and one of the original like OG crypto bros. I mean, like if cryptocurrency were a biker gang, like in Sons of Anarchy, Bryce would be one of those dudes wearing the original patch on his cut. Is that what biker dudes call the vest? Cut? Hey, whatever. So Bryce starts off in the Midwest with his professional life, but at some point in the early 2000s, Bryce ends up moving to the Santa Barbara area of Southern California, just outside of LA, Hollywood. And Bryce did software for some cool shit, like the public stuff that we know about. His LinkedIn profile says that he worked for Lockheed Martin. He worked for Lockheed Martin's missile and defense systems. This guy was slated with making quality assurance software to improve the accuracy of Lockheed Martin's optics. Like, just think about that. Like the Patriot missile, Hellfire missile, the MLRS, the Javelin, in part were made more accurate because of this dude. He's kind of a badass. If you're a nerd, he's kind of a badass. And Bryce is living a good life at the time. He's got a loving wife, happy and healthy daughter. He's got a good family, making a good living, right? All of the American dream stuff that just about anybody could want. And while Bryce is developing ridiculously overpowered freedom delivery systems, Bryce's 14-year-old daughter is attending a high school in Santa Barbara, California, public school. But during the summer of 2010, on a clear, sunny Sunday afternoon, Courtney decides to go on a bike ride, and then she just never comes back. Now, if I can be real with you guys for a minute, having 2 young girls at home myself, this is a top 5, probably top 1 most terrifying scenario I could possibly imagine for myself. Like, I'm not even joking. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. I can't even begin to understand what someone like Bryce must have been trying to go through when he was trying to deal with this. He publicly states that it absolutely decimates his marriage. Him and his wife do not stay together. It breaks them apart. It gives me absurd levels of skin-crawling anxiety just thinking about this. And any dads, I think, any dads with little girls at home in the comments section are probably nodding their head right now like, me too, right? This is one of those things where we're all nodding our head in unison, just guaranteed. And the next step here is that Bryce has to call the cops, obviously, right? He calls the cops. The FBI gets involved. The State Department gets involved. The California Highway Department, they all get involved. And from here on out, okay, the details get muddy. A lot of this is coming from forum posts, like I said before, and tweets that Bryce has made himself talking about all of this. While I believe wholeheartedly everything that Bryce is saying, just understand that there's no public court record or anything recounting these details. This is all from Bryce. And because of the nature of this missing persons case, and with it being underage and the child slash teenager being kidnapped, and the fact that she's still here living in the United States with everyone, sharing too much information, sharing too much detail could end up becoming jeopardizing for Courtney and her well-being. And we obviously don't want that to happen. So we're going to make sure that certain details, Bryce wanted to make sure that certain details didn't get shared, and that if there was ever a book written about this, which he's been contemplating, that it's something that ends up remaining like a work of fiction, not nonfiction where they're actually naming names, because people like Courtney could potentially be harmed, right? So again, just we're being careful here. In 2010, when this whole thing began, a missing children's forum called Find Madeline ends up getting a post that Bryce writes. He makes an entry giving the details of his missing daughter with a couple of photos and begins retracing her steps. And this is what Courtney looked like back then. Pretty little girl. The story goes that Courtney met a guy at some point during that summer. The guy, a Mexican national, had been grooming Courtney for quite some time, ultimately convincing her that she needed to go be with him. And the day she left, she ended up ditching her bike and walked and hitchhiked her way across the Mexican border right into the hands of the sex trade. Yeah, from here, it starts to get pretty dark. I'm not going to even try and mince words. It gets dark. Courtney is forced to do things she's forced to do things with people. She's beaten multiple times within an inch of her life on several different occasions. She's denied access to a phone. She's never allowed to go outside by herself. She's never allowed to ever have any money. And she's told all of this is happening because her parents are mad at her. And all of this is happening to her because it's her fault. Something that she did put her in that situation. Textbook grooming, brainwashing bullshit. Now, luckily for Courtney, she is not one of those go with the flow type of people. She's headstrong, she's argumentative, she's belligerent, right? She's combative, which probably saved her life, if I'm being honest. Bryce ended up saying, if you close your eyes and imagine the worst case scenario, you're probably not far off. Pretty dark stuff. A year later, this is in 2011 now, we're a year later from her abduction in 2010. In June of 2010, for some unknown reason, Courtney is able to convince her captors to allow her to use a phone. She ends up taking that phone and Googles herself to find a Facebook post that was made by her dad, by Bryce, regarding his missing daughter, with an email address attached to the post. And in June of 2011, she ends up sending an email to her father to tell him that she is in Mexico. Now, obviously, in this moment, the wheel starts spinning really quickly. Bryce attempts to coordinate a rescue with the FBI and international authorities and the State Department. And he states in a forum post on this same forum that they're sending someone to their assumed location to verify her whereabouts within 48 hours and then attempt to repatriate her into the United States, bring her back. The attempt fails miserably. She ends up stating in a follow-up email that she doesn't want the State Department to know where she is. So the whole thing dies. Bryce ends up writing, "This is the kind of thing that experts warn you about. Welcome to the roller coaster," he says. And this is where public perception and governmental agency involvement start changing. Because when you're a missing person in the United States, There are all of these organizations and agencies that try to rally to the cause. They're missing, they will say. Oh no, we have to find this person. What happened to them? We don't know. But now they knew where she was. Technically speaking, she's now considered found. She's not missing anymore. She's in Mexico. We know where she is. Blah, 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 blah. And even though we realize this now 14, maybe 15 at this point year-old girl is obviously being coerced into saying that she doesn't want to come home yet, that doesn't stop the legal status in this case from changing. She's not missing anymore. Now she's not abducted. She is an endangered runaway. And because of this categorical shift, the public forums start changing how they list things categorically. They start shutting down the missing persons forum posts that are coming up saying, oh, she was found in Mexico, and they then go and they just archive the forum thread. You can still go and see and read them, but the forum thread is closed. No more hunt needed. We know where she is. She's found. So the FBI, the Highway Department, the Child Identification Program, the State Department, all knowing that they now know where Courtney is or was, all shifted into a different form of management of Bryce's situation. Now, instead of a search effort to try to find her, instead now it's this effort of diplomacy where they try to convince this sex trafficking ring to not only let her go, but to tell the feds where they can find her. Right, because that's going to work. I don't know if y'all have seen what the sentiment is of normal Mexican people in Mexico, of the federal government of the United States right now, but it's not all that hot, and it wasn't that hot back then either. The war on drugs tore apart a lot of Mexico, has been for 30 years at this point. Reagan kind of started that whole thing. The border starts getting locked down more and more. We see that happening throughout the early 2000s into where Bryce is now, where Courtney is now in 2013. It's more difficult to move things and make things happen across borders. So Courtney is stuck. And obviously, if you're a criminal in Mexico, you don't trust the federal government of the United States, right? So Courtney's stuck. She ain't getting out. And the federal government knows this, and they tell Bryce that there's not a whole lot of hope here. They're working on it, but there's not a lot of hope. From that moment in 2011, Bryce knew that the government wasn't going to do shit for him. So he came up with his own plan. Bryce puts together his own plan. One way or another, he was going to get his daughter back. But this plan that he had in mind, he needed to fund it. He needed money. And obviously the question is how. He had investments that he had liquidated, but that was going into other search efforts. And of course, during this time, the federal government is still involved. He's still having conversations with people. The caseworker involved is sending him periodic updates. Here's what we figured out. Usually it was a nothing burger. And Bryce's frustration would shine through in those conversations. And he would end up saying stuff like, I just want this to be over with. Wouldn't you? I mean, any parent would, right? He wanted to be done with the whole thing. And Bryce is a brilliant IT professional, right? With vast experience in both software development and web development and programming. He worked on huge web backend stuff for Thomson Reuters Scientific. He's got tons of experience in IT. And remember how he said he was one of the original crypto bros? So Bryce, back in 2009, a full year before his daughter gets abducted, starts learning about blockchain technology and is fascinated, especially with the idea of Bitcoin. Right from the start, this decentralized currency that he sees as the natural progression of how commerce will be getting done in the future. That's something that he dives into with both feet, completely taken up by this idea of Bitcoin. Still is throughout the world. Just as an aside, Bryce is someone that has invented and started more cryptocurrencies than anyone else in the world. He runs the website CoinDesk and has been slated as an expert in crypto for many, many years now. Really, really smart dude.
And that's we use those historical precedents in order to build the legal arguments for what it is that we are doing. And part of the way that we have to establish these networks is very particular in order to say they are currencies or commodities or not securities, or they are securities, quite frankly.
So shortly after Bitcoin becomes mineable, just a few short months before Courtney is taken in 2010, back when the reward for finding a Bitcoin block on the blockchain with your own personal computer awarded 50 Bitcoin, Bryce ends up mining 150 BTC. He mines 3 blocks on his personal computer at home in the earliest days. So he takes his 150 Bitcoin in May of 2013, realizing that he still has those Bitcoin on his old personal computer, and uses the proceeds from the sale of those coins during the 2013 market rally to build himself a real bona fide big old mining rig for his house. He ends up purchasing some of the first ASIC miners to mine Bitcoin out of his home and starts running the meter up on generating some cash so that he can enact this plan, because he believes that Bitcoin is going to retain its value. Lucky for him, he was right. So back to the original email. From the moment that this message arrives from Courtney, and notice I'm using really heavy quotes here, Courtney, from the moment that Courtney says that she doesn't want to come home and Bryce realizes that the government isn't going to really help him anymore, Bryce quits his job and he starts liquidating his investments and he starts mining a ton of Bitcoin and spends the following 2 years learning how to be a proper crook. He decides that he's going to break bad, and Bryce lives out his own IRL, like multi-episodic Breaking Bad miniseries that I wish somebody would adapt into television, because this next section is friggin' crazy. He spends the next 2 years slowly piecing together, while he's becoming a crook, he slowly pieces together all of the information that his daughter is sending him. He knows that she's in Mexico, but he doesn't know exactly where, so she starts sending him pictures with basic identifiable landmarks, small pieces of the puzzle, and he takes trips into Mexico, trying to get an idea from the population where exactly it was that she could be. Learns all he can, absorbs all the information he can, however he can, on how the Mexican cartels traffic humans, all this while. Then he finds her. He realizes, he finds out, he cracks it and finds out that she is 3,000 miles south of the Mexican border in a small town just north of Mexico City called Coyotepec. This entire region of Mexico is owned by the Sinaloa cartel. He ends up stating that he had to make several trips to and from Mexico to learn about where to go, what he needed to do. Both the governmental agencies here in the States and the governmental agencies in Mexico are all telling him that he's going to end up dead, that this situation is a fool's errand, there's no saving her, but Bryce doesn't give a shit. He doesn't listen to any of them, and in this situation, all of those people are useless anyway, and in Mexico, he ends up stating that the local Mexican authorities are just good for cracking heads and taking bribes, basically. And that's probably true. According to Google Maps, the map that he provided of his trip, it's approximately a 31-hour drive to make from Santa Barbara, California to Coyotepec. But Bryce says it took about a full week to get there, and his reasoning? Because Mexico. And again, that's probably true. And here, my friends, is where it starts to get truly wild. Bryce hatches a scheme. He's going to go into Mexico. He's going to go to Coyotepec to rescue his daughter. Likely a cartel-run sex trafficking operation 3,000 miles from home in Mexico by himself. Bryce spends almost 2 months in Mexico, 6 weeks of which is in the town of Coyotepec. Bryce doesn't speak Spanish at all. So, and I can't make this up, he pretends to be a deaf beggar, which he says is someone easily ignored then, because if he's deaf, he can't hear, he doesn't understand Spanish. He can't hear anyway, so he never learns Spanish. Once he's able to lay eyes on where she's actually been held, he sees her. He starts pumping money into the town. All those proceeds from the Bitcoin, he starts throwing money into this town in buckets of cash. He says, I basically bought the town. I pumped so much money into the town that the people were all getting wasted every night and sleeping late into the day. And he referred to this town as a backwoods 2-horse shithole by the power of Bitcoin. Goddamn. So eventually, after having plied all of the people in this town with tons of cash and booze, he gets them to the point of laziness where he's able to, through emails, eventually convince his daughter to muster up the courage to escape. And she does. In the dead of night, in mid-November, barefoot, she tries to get out of the house that she was being held in. And then with the help of her father, she travels 30 miles in the dead of night to get to the U.S. Embassy. But that's not where our story ends. There is more. Courtney and Bryce end up making it all the way to the U.S. border together. Bryce makes it there with his daughter. Thankfully, U.S. soil. They're free, right? But they still had to get through customs. Remember, she's been missing for 3 years. She's been gone. They knew where she was, roughly, but they knew that she was gone. And since she was gone, Bryce trying to get her back into the States, he doesn't just have papers with her like stuff on it. He's got to try and get her back into the States. And the best way that he figures he could do it, he just walks in and gets himself arrested. He figures they're safe. They're in holding cells. They will figure out that she's an American citizen. She was born in the United States. They'll sort it out. Eventually, they'll be good, right? And it did. It did. Just not the way that Bryce thought it would. Remember earlier how I said that Bryce would talk to a caseworker, and every once in a while when he talked to them, it was like a nothing burger, and he would get frustrated and say that he just wanted it to be over? Yeah, well, the caseworker in that case back in 2012 at some point decided that that statement meant that Bryce was abandoning the search for his child. He was going to abandon his child. And that caseworker remanded Courtney to become then a ward of the state. So from 2012, at some point midway through 2012, until the point in time that Bryce had rescued and brought his daughter back home, all that while, Courtney was considered a foster child. And when Bryce showed up with her, he was legally no longer her dad. He was no longer her legal guardian. He was her biological father, but he held no authority over her at all. The state did. She was a ward of the state. And again, I can't make this up. Since she was a ward of the state and had disappeared, she had a warrant out for her arrest because she was a missing ward of the state. Bro. Now, of course, the investigator, the caseworkers that had realized that the mistake was made, said that they would have it fixed in a matter of hours. And Bryce was confident that they would, but of course, the wheels of justice in this case moved slowly. This was also right before Thanksgiving, like we're talking November 20th or so in 2013, right before Thanksgiving. So they don't have like as many people working in and around these government agencies like they normally would because of the holiday. And while they all felt horrible, the Border Patrol agents said that they felt bad. They wanted to come and shake Bryce's hand because they thought that he was like the dad of dads. They still had to hold Bryce's daughter for a time until the legal side of it got figured out, which didn't happen that day or the next day. So Bryce, from the Border Patrol office, from the border at customs, whatever, got sent home, and Courtney got put into a foster home. Just another speed bump, no big deal. Right? Now, the caseworker profusely apologizes and says no matter what the investigator says, they are going to fix this. And they did, but it took a month. Courtney got brought back to the United States in November of 2013. Not until late December, just before the new year, between Christmas and the new year, were they actually able to get Bryce in front of a judge, where the judge then said, I am very sorry, on the record, and gave him back his parental rights. They gave him back his daughter in late 2013, almost the 2014 new year. She was 17 years old. Finally, the guy gets his daughter back. Now in November, late November of 2023 would have marked 10 years since Bryce had brought his daughter home. She's 27 now. And while through some searches and stuff, just through ancillary things, I think I was able to locate who she is. I'm not going to share that. I never reached out to her. I never reached out to Bryce. I don't feel it pertinent to do such a thing. She especially deserves her privacy and deserves the ability to live her life after everything that her and her dad, her especially, have been through. Bryce ended up, though, describing her, posted a picture of her on Twitter, of the two of them together at Thanksgiving of 2023, described her a couple of years ago as someone that is enjoying their life now, sleeping on Bryce's couch and making hemp bracelets. And I personally would like to wish both of them the best and hope that the nightmare of this entire thing just becomes some distant memory. As much as it likely won't be that, I hope it subsides to just some dull and distant thing in the back of their head. But I will leave you with one thing. There is one silver lining in this whole thing, because there is one unanswered question. And that is what happened to the guy. You know, the guy, the predator, the guy that abducted her, the guy that coerced her, the one that groomed her. What happened to that dude? Well, if you're wondering what happened, Bryce said in a tweet that he's not sure what exactly happened to that guy. He must have disappeared. Fuck yeah. Fuck yeah, Bryce. Fuck yeah.